Hi, my name is Tadas Vinokur. Welcome to Flickr Theory Reviews. A lot of content makers that discuss Roland Barthes seem to be focusing on Barthes' idea of the death of the author, which for Barthes basically meant that the constant emphasizing of the authority, the significance of the author in literature is an outdated approach to literary criticism. That is to say, Barthes argued that traditional literary criticism focused too much on trying to bring to light the original, authentic intentions of the author, when in fact, the actual meaning of a text is generated when we spontaneously engage with a piece of text in the here and now. I really like this. Having said that, in this video I would like to approach Barthes a bit differently with the help of another of his works, namely The Pleasure of Text. I want to argue quite boringly that authorship is still, in fact, quite important. Basically, I want to put emphasis back on the author. I want to see what makes a good text a good piece of art, and most importantly, what makes a good artist. Lastly, I want to compare literature to other forms of art and see if Barthes' ideas could be applied specifically to the analysis of music and film. So, let's get on with it. In his 1973 book, The Pleasure of Text, Roland Barthes explores the ways in which good literature can make us feel. In particular, Barthes examines the reasons why certain texts can give us pleasure, or even better, a sense of deep, visceral, orgasmic bliss. Barthes, in fact, begins this book by stressing this exact distinction. Namely, he claims that there are texts that give us pleasure and there are texts that give us a sense of bliss. Well, let's begin with pleasure. What is a pleasurable piece of text? Barthes writes, "Text of pleasure is the text that contents, fills, grants euphoria, the text that comes from culture and does not break with it, is linked to a comfortable practice of reading." This means that pleasurable text is there to satisfy our cultural expectations. Pleasurable text does not try to unsettle us, it reiterates that which is already known to us. To visualize this better, we should, like Barthes does, perceive text as a body. Barthes writes, "Apparently, Arab scholars, when speaking of the text, use this admirable expression, the certain body. Yes, we should perceive text almost like a human body. And yes, this metaphor is meant to be a bit sexual. In fact, in his different book, Lover's Discourse, Barthes goes as far as to compare language to the touch of human skin. Language is a skin. I rub my language against the other. It is as if I had words instead of fingers, or fingers at the tip of my words." Roland Barthes. Lover's Discourse. Anyways, the specific way that the body, the text, is shaped by the author will define our emotional attachment to the body. We can interpret text as a body in a hermeneutic way, that is, text is a body because it possesses grammatical, syntactic, formal structures. Also, we can interpret text as a body in a sexual way, in that a piece of text can induce a sense of quasi-erotic pleasure. In other words, a piece of text can trigger us viscerally. The reason why I'm talking about the body is quite simple. I want to stress that the author is able to leave certain marks, indentations, abrasions on a piece of text. In the case of a pleasurable piece of text, which we have already discussed, these marks, these indentations will follow and accompany the reader without challenging too many of the reader's cultural habits. So, when we wait for the storyline to reach its climax, it does. When we wait for the protagonist to get into trouble, he or she does. That is not to say that pleasurable text is bad. The body of pleasurable text is simply structured in order to relieve and comfort us. This is very different from what Barthes would consider to be a text of bliss, or in French, the text of jouissance. Today, we're joined by a very special guest, a friend of mine who knows everything there is to know about the concept of jouissance. So, without further ado, I welcome my friend, my colleague, Tadas Vinokur. Hi.
How are you doing? How are you
So
doing?
please tell us a little bit more about what is jouissance.
Let's begin by noting that the concept of jouissance, or bliss as it is translated in this book, is a part of a long history of theoretical works of the French academia. Jouissance, in the most simplistic terms, it describes an excessive kind of pleasure. Jouissance is the feeling we get when we go beyond, even deeper than the conventional hedonistic pleasure. French psychoanalyst Lacan had a very prominent interpretation of jouissance. French writer Bataille also had a very influential interpretation of jouissance. Julia Kristeva had one. Barthes, as we can see, also has a decent one. It is almost as if it was cool to have a theory of jouissance in the structuralist and post-structuralist era. Everyone had to have it.
What's that? Of course I have a theory on jouissance. Of course! Now, let's look at what Barthes himself has to say about the text of bliss, or the text of jouissance. Barthes writes, "Text of bliss is the text that imposes a state of loss, the text that discomforts, perhaps to the point of certain boredom, unsettles the reader's historical, cultural, psychological assumptions. The consistency of his tastes, values, memories brings to a crisis his relation with language." So, as I have mentioned already, the concept of bliss is unique because it carries a level of sensual ambiguity. That is to say, the feeling of bliss is not generated only by the positive or pleasant reactions to the text, as it is also triggered by some negative reactions to the text, such as feelings of loss, boredom, or even moral discomfort. Now, we should go back to the idea of text as a body. The sense of bliss occurs when the reader starts playing games with the body of text. That is, when the reader's own body and mind starts reacting to the body of text. This is an important point. Bliss occurs when the reader experiences emotions that could not be easily explained or put into language. Actually, the reader is first struck by discomfort, and only then, by way of grappling with the text, the reader reaches a point of bliss, where all linguistic, moral, and aesthetic conventions of the text are finally melting away. The reader thus becomes a creator of his own pure experience. As Barthes claims, the writer of bliss is the writer of the impossible text. This text is outside pleasure, outside criticism, unless it is reached through another text of bliss. You cannot speak on such a text, you can only speak in it. In its fashion, enter into a desperate plagiarism, hysterically affirm the void of bliss. Let's, in this case, focus on the writer of bliss. As I said, I want to emphasize the significance of the author. I admit this sounds a bit ridiculous, since the authority of the author is fetishized most of the time anyways. But bear with me. I would like to see how does the author create a body of text that can induce bliss. What should an artist do if he or she wants to enable the observer's, the reader's own creativity? Well, first of all, the artist should engage in an honest game with the observer. That is to say, the artist should not cater to the observer. Instead, he or she should initiate a ritual of mutual reciprocity. The artist should not give a comfortable bit of truth about life. Rather, he or she should unravel the deep complexity of life. This way, both the observer and the artist can participate in the making of aesthetic meaning equally. I would like to strengthen this argument by quickly exploring the aesthetics of music. Shut it! As I think that music is one of the more visceral, instinctive mediums of art. Music, most of the time, does not present us with a literal meaning. It simply produces abstract sonic allusions to a plurality of meanings and emotions. This is why the famous German philosopher Theodor Adorno, in his essay on the fetish character of music, is critiquing popular music, which is homogeneous, predictable, and enjoyable in the most superficial sense of the word. Adorno believes that modern listeners are used to listening to music which possesses a moment of climax, a catchy melody, or a sudden increase in volume. This allows the listener to fetishize a single element within the piece of music, without actually experiencing the wholeness of it. Adorno, in this way, is arguing for something like Roland Barthes' text of BLISS, in that Adorno praises music that produces sensual ambiguity, music that unsettles the listener, allows one to engage with the wholeness, the positive and the negative aspects of a musical body. Adorno, in other words, praises music that allows listeners to engage creatively with different constituent parts of the composition. He adamantly stresses that the listener should not simply focus on one part of the musical piece at expense of the whole. This is perfectly expressed in the following quote: "Not for nothing does the rule of the established conductor remind one of the totalitarian Führer. Like the latter, he reduces aura and organization to a common denominator." Adorno goes on to say that contemporary music is so homogeneous that its performance sounds like its own phonograph record. The dynamic is so predetermined that there are no longer any tensions at all. At this point of our segment, I would also like to quickly consider the critical analysis of film. Walter Benjamin, in his famous essay, The Work of Art in the Age of Mechanical Reproduction, argues that film is a uniquely progressive medium due to the fact that movies can be massively reproduced. Now, one could easily critique Walter Benjamin because the mass reproduction of work of art can and does decrease the uniqueness of the work of art. However, the mass production of movies is exactly what makes films, for Benjamin, a progressive medium. The reproducibility of a movie distances the spectator from the great aura of the author and thus forces the spectator to engage in a free dialogue with the work. The spectator is no longer consumed by the fetishized genius of the work of art. The spectator is engaging in a game with the body of an artwork. For example, the distraction of the montage, for Benjamin, can work as a form of shock. The spectator, in this way, is unsettled and forced to think critically.
For me, one of the movies that comes into mind when I think of jouissance or bliss is Kubrick's Space Odyssey. I watched it for the first time when I was 16 and I definitely did not understand it. I was clueless. The movie was very long. I probably even fell asleep during the part with all the blinking, alternating colors. However, the movie had a unique rhythm, a unique collection of symbols that represented the progress of humanity, the power of artificial intelligence, and the meaning of religion. I inevitably had to adapt to these symbols. Whoa. The movie made me an equal participant in that I tried to the best of my abilities to wrap my head around the meaning. Even though I did not ultimately grasp it, the experience was, as Barthes would say, blissful. This was because I was involved. I was not consumed by the movie. Even when I was distracted by the visual fireworks of the movie, I was still part of the dialogue.
It should be noted that Barthes' analysis of literature differs quite a bit from Walter Benjamin's and Theodor Adorno's criticisms of aesthetics. For starters, Walter Benjamin and Theodor Adorno are markedly political. They're putting together a Marxist materialist critique of a work of art. Moreover, even Benjamin's and Adorno's criticisms differ a lot from each other, even though they're both representatives of the same Frankfurt School. Specifically, Adorno is much more skeptical of the capitalist reproducibility of the work of art. However, I still believe that all of these writers share something in common, which is that they argue for an autonomous artwork that can unsettle us, provoke us, allow us to engage with the whole of the artistic body. Barthes, Adorno, Benjamin are arguing for a piece of art that could induce deep intellectual bliss, that produces both negative and positive emotions, rather than just a superficial sense of satisfaction. The author should, therefore, focus on creating an artwork that works in the spur of the moment. The way the reader, as Barthes argues, should announce the death of the author, the same way, I think, the author should announce the death of the reader. They should not cater to each other. They should play a blissful game of independence. They should be together, but separately. Thank you for watching. See you next time.